Hello there, welcome to this channel. This is a quick video where we're going to discuss how understanding past civilizations can help us with problems that we have in our own time. Throughout history, different civilizations have faced numerous challenges, and finding out how they dealt with those issues may be able to help us tackle similar problems that we face today. The Bronze Age collapse refers to a period of time between the 12th and 9th centuries BC, when many of the era's most prominent civilizations suddenly fell apart. These include the Hittite Empire, the New Kingdom of Egypt, the Mycenaean civilization, the Kassite Empire, the Syrian kingdoms, and the early kingdoms of Israel. This was obviously quite a significant event, but it wasn't a global event by any means. It didn't wipe out humanity. It just had an effect on certain civilizations. But the effects of this collapse were actually pretty similar from place to place. For example, there was a massive decline in population, and trade networks that had existed for hundreds of years were broken up. The result was that the general standard of living went down across the affected regions. And these changes weren't just temporary either. In some cases, it took centuries for these populations to recover. But perhaps one of the most interesting aspects of this collapse is that scholars don't agree on what caused it. There are dozens of theories out there, which is great, because now scientists can study various aspects of life at the time to try and find evidence to support their claims. One of the more popular theories is the theory that climate change played some kind of role in the collapse. Now, scientists have found evidence to suggest that there was some kind of serious drought right around the time of the collapse. And droughts can certainly cause problems for civilizations. They can lead to crop failure, famine, and force people to migrate. But there are other civilizations that faced similar droughts and didn't break down like these ones did. So while it seems that the drought certainly would have made things worse, it probably wasn't the sole cause of the collapse. Another popular theory is that it was the result of an invasion of people from the east, known as the Sea People. According to some texts, these mysterious raiders came from across the sea and attacked coastal cities. But again, other civilizations that traded with these cultures also faced attacks from these so-called Sea People, and they survived. So clearly, there's more to the story. Some scientists claim that the collapse was really a series of collapses brought on by a combination of factors, like competition for resources, migrations, and climate change. Basically, these civilizations faced multiple problems and couldn't deal with them all at once. And we don't have to guess about how all this happened either. We can look at the archaeological record to see what happened, and sometimes we find evidence for competing theories. For example, there is evidence that suggests there was a lot of warfare during this time which would line up with the invasion theory, but there's also evidence of widespread crop failures which would line up with the climate change theory. Now, this is a very simplified explanation of a very complex issue, but what I want to point out here is that if we were to put aside the fact that this happened thousands of years ago and just focus on the actual problem, we can see that many of the problems civilizations faced back then are still relevant today. Famines, resource management, and climate change are all issues that we face even now. Studying the Bronze Age collapse helps us get a better understanding of how people dealt with these kinds of problems in the past, and maybe even find solutions to the problems we have in our own time. Like maybe the answer to our energy crisis was invented 3,000 years ago. Maybe studying past civilizations can help us save our planet. One major difference between the Bronze Age civilizations and our modern society is that back then there were no nation-states. Nation-states are countries like France or Japan or Brazil. They're relatively large areas of land controlled by a single government. Nowadays, every country in the world is a nation-state, except for a few small exceptions, like the Vatican City or Hong Kong. But back in the day, the largest political units were empires like the Roman Empire or the Mongol Empire. The concept of a nation-state didn't really emerge until the Peace of Westphalia in 1648, and while the idea of nation-states is fairly new, empires have been around since ancient times. One of the earliest well-known empires was the Akkadian Empire, which was located in Mesopotamia, otherwise known as the Fertile Crescent. The empire was founded by Sargon of Akkad around 2334 BC, and lasted until roughly 2154 BC. During its existence, the empire stretched from the Persian Gulf to the Mediterranean Sea. That's a huge area. And keeping such a large area under control wasn't easy. The vast distances meant that communication between cities was slow. And if something happened at one end of the empire, it could take months for the ruler to hear about it. And even if he did hear about it, it might have already been too late. By the time he sent his response, someone else could have taken advantage of the situation. Because of this, it was important for the ruler of the empire to have some way of controlling his far-flung domains, without having to be directly involved in the administration of each city. So they created a system. Much like the modern nation-state, they appointed governors to oversee each province. Then those governors would appoint smaller officials to oversee even smaller areas. And these local officials would basically serve as the representatives of the king. And this system worked surprisingly well. It allowed the empire to function with very little oversight from the king, and it gave the provinces a degree of self-governance. In fact, it was so good that it lasted for centuries. The Roman Empire used a similar system to control its provinces, and we use a similar system to this day. Our local representatives are supposed to represent our interests and make decisions on our behalf. Obviously, there are some differences. Back then, the officials were appointed by the king. Nowadays, we elect our leaders. But the basic concept remains the same. Every year, approximately 78 million Americans move from one place to another. That's almost 1 out of every 4 Americans. And while most Americans travel by car or plane, there's a much more efficient way to get around the country: trains. Unfortunately, the United States has fallen behind other industrialized nations when it comes to passenger rail. Today, only around 1% of Americans choose to travel by train. The US has the lowest rate of passenger rail travel out of any developed country. While passenger rail makes up 12% of transportation in France and 25% in Japan. It wasn't always this way though. Once upon a time, trains were the primary mode of transportation for long-distance travel in America. The first passenger railroad in the United States opened in 1830. It ran between Boston and Providence. At the time, it was a horse-drawn railroad. Steam locomotives didn't arrive until 2 years later. Either way, for the next several decades, railroads were hugely important for the growth of the United States. As the rail network expanded, travel became faster and cheaper, which led to increased trade and immigration. People could also get around more easily, which led to the United States becoming a lot more interconnected. The US government even helped fund the construction of railroads. That's how important they were. Unfortunately, the importance of trains declined during the mid-20th century. First, airplanes started getting cheaper and more comfortable. And then cars got cheaper. When trains were the main form of transportation, they helped spur massive economic growth. But once they lost that title, they became less economically important. And today, Amtrak, the national railway of the United States, is a money pit. In 2022, it received over $1.4 billion in operating support, and ridership is declining. So here's the question. Is there anything we can learn from the history of trains? Well, it turns out there is. One of the biggest reasons that train ridership is so low in the US is that people think that trains are slow. But a 2015 study conducted by the Texas A&M Transportation Institute found that in urban areas, trains are just as fast as cars, and in some cases faster than cars. What's more surprising is that a similar study conducted in Europe found that trains were significantly faster than cars. So why do Americans think trains are slow? Well, it's probably because of the way our train system is set up. Back in the day, there were dozens of railroads. Private companies competed against each other. But nowadays, there's only one railroad. Because of this, there's very little competition. So the company doesn't feel pressured to improve efficiency. The answer then is to either bring back competition or nationalize the railway system. Both options are controversial, and bringing back competition would require upgrading hundreds of miles of track. But both options exist. And studying the history of trains gives us insights into which options might work best. Those are just 2 examples, but there are countless others. The ancient Greeks developed democracy. Ancient Rome developed concrete. The Maya built monumental architecture and pyramids. And all of these achievements, and more, help us solve the problems that we face today. History doesn't repeat itself, but it often rhymes. And the more we understand the lessons of the past, the better prepared we'll be for the future. Thank you for watching. Do you have a favorite civilization? Let me know down in the comments below. Also, don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already.